I am Arun Bagel and I will talk about karma. Here is chapter first and part second of karma, the tedium and tyranny of karma. The level at which the compulsiveness of karma operates may surprise you. When you walk into an auditorium or conference room, the seat you choose may seem like a decision you made freely. But often a level of karmic compulsion is involved. If you attend the same conference or class for the next 5 days, you may notice that you are likely to sit in the same place each day. Many years ago, when I was training teachers to impart my inner engineering program in different places, the new trainee teachers would often ask, Sadhguru, what kind of questions are a student likely to ask? What can we expect and how do we deal with it? So I made a chart for them of the arrangement of the class and told them, see, if a person comes and settles down here, this is the kind of question they are going to ask. If a participant settles down there, that is what they are going to ask. Now, of course, there were exceptions. A latecomer might choose a place based only the seat that is available. But 90% of the time it happened exactly the way I said it would. And that is how predictable karma is. So, karma is not some external system of a crime and punishment. It is an internal cycle generated by you. These patterns are not oppressing you from without, but from within. Externally, it may be a new day. You may have a new job, a new home, a new life partner, a new baby. You may even be in a new country, but internally you are experiencing the same cycles. The some internal oscillations, the some behavioral shift, the some mental reaction, and the some psychological tendencies. Everything has changed except for your experience. You can keep modifying the outer environment, but nothing will work because you haven't figured out how to change your karma. Something else seems to be pushing your buttons, and someone else seems to be driving your car. For every other creature on this planet, the struggles are essentially physical. If they eat well, they are just fine. But human beings are different. For humans, when the stomach is empty, there is only one problem. But the stomach is full, there are 100 problems. You may talk freedom, but you are gold plating your limitations all the time in absolute unawareness. Even as you extol the values of independence, everything about you, not just the way you look or feel or think, but even the way you sit or stand or walk, is determined by your past patterns. Do not forget that in addition to being unconscious and compulsive, karma is also deeply cyclical. The karmic information within your system is encoded in different kinds of cycles. The largest cycle is the solar cycle because everything animate and inanimate in the solar system is deeply influenced by the sun. Our planet is no exceptions. The solar cycle is a period of 4,356 days, nearly 12 years. Someone who lives according to the solar cycle leads a life of great health, well-being, alignment, and minimal frictions. As the length of karmic cycle decreases, life becomes progressively more unbalanced. If your life runs in 3 or 6 month cycle, you are in serious state of psychological imbalance. The same inner upheavals or life situations will keep recurring every few months. If your life is determined by a 28-day cycle, the lunar cycle, which is also the shortest one, you could well be considered deranged or psychotic. The word luni, as you know, is linked to the word lunar, and this is no coincidence. It should be remembered, however, that the karmic cycle has nothing to do with the reproductive cycles of the female body. Now, if we do not break these internal and external patterns, nothing new will ever happen. You might have noticed that the more successful you become, the more frustrated you get. Because somewhere unconsciously you sense that you are simply going around in circles. You may have learned to ride the cycle, but you are not free from it. With yogic practices, the aspiration is to move toward the solar cycle so your balance and stability are assured. You may not be able to change your past actions and the mental and the emotional karma you accumulated, but you no longer slide into short spin cycles. You no longer wear karma as a skin tight garment. You learn to wear it loosely, you hold it at a distance. The problem is that people do not realize just how tenacious karma is. You could meet with an accident and die, but your karma is not destroyed. You could break your head and blow all your brains out, but the karma is continuous. This is how resilient, how relentless, how subtle the karmic mechanism is. And that is why freedom from the cycle so often seems like such a remote possibility. The yogic tradition tells us that in addition to the physical body, the Annamaya Kosha, each human being has a mental body, and that is Manomaya Kosha, and an energy body, that is Pranayam Kosha. There are subtler bodies as well, known as the etheric body, that is Vignamaya Kosha, and the bliss body Anandmaya Kosha. But the accumulation of a karma essentially happens on the levels of the first three bodies: physical, mental, and energetic. Therefore, even if you break your body and your mind, your life energy continues to wear the karmic imprint like a computer hard disk. The backup systems are so efficient that even if you lose your body or your mind, you still do not lose your karma. However, it does not matter what volumes of karma you have. The moment you start stepping into the subtler dimensions of the etheric and bliss bodies, your karma cannot touch you. The law of cause and effect can operate only on the physical, mental, and energy levels. Beyond that, it has no impact. The moment you begin to taste the divine, as it were, your karma has no hold over you. And we will explore this at a greater length in part 2 of this book. There was a time when human beings wrote on stool tablets. From stone tablets we moved to leaves, and then we came to books. From books we moved to cassettes and CDs. We have now came to the age of microchip. What could be stored on a million stone tablets is encrypted in the tiniest speck imaginable. It won't be long before technology find a way to start recording information on pure energy itself. This may not yet have manifested in modern technology, but eventually it will happen. I say this not out of any technological knowledge, but because I know how the inner mechanism works. And the atomic and the cosmic, the individual and universal mirror each other on every level. Right now, the same electricity that powers your light bulb becomes light. The same electricity that powers your air conditioner makes the air cool. The same electricity that powers a microphone becomes amplified sound. This is not because the electricity is intelligent. It is simply the mechanism of the appliances. What a day will come when we all have smart electricity. We will be able to load memory onto the energy of electricity directly, so the very electric stream can come with an intent. It will have the information to behave in specific ways and to make certain decisions. Maybe the day is still far away, but I have no doubt we are heading there. When I initiate group of people into a spiritual process, each person's energies have behaved differently depending upon their karmic information. Though the same process is offered to everybody, and each person's energy response depends upon the type of karma they carry. The energy body responds according to the kind of software imprinted upon it. That is why two people's response to an initiation is never the same. In short, karma operates on many different plans. You cannot shake it off with physical illness or accident and dementia and psychosis or death. You will notice that even those who are mentally ill do not behave similarly. Their karmic structure may be out of control, but it still governs the way they behave. Unless you loosen the grip of karma, there is no way out. This is the deleterium and tyranny of the karmic root. This is also why people have from time immemorial sought something more, even though they do not have what is it. This condition has been given many names, from existential discontent and ennui to simple anxiety and unease. It is the sense of not living life at full throttle, not understanding its purpose, its beginning or its end, its direction or the sources of its propulsions. It is the age old human resentment of powerlessness, of limitations. Next, the smell of one days. As we have seen, whatever you do with your body, mind, or energy leaves a certain imprint. These imprints configure themselves into tendencies. These tendencies have been traditionally described in India by a wonderfully apt word, that is Vasana. Literally, Vasana means smell. This smell is generated by a vast accumulation of impressions caused by your physical, mental, emotional, and energy actions. Depending upon the type of smell you emit, you attract certain kinds of life situations to yourself. Think of a flower. A flower has a certain kind of vasana. It is this fragrance that draws certain kinds of life to it. It cannot move and it has no volition, but because of its fragrance, it may be chosen for worship in a temple sanctum. In fact, thanks to its vasana, it gains entry where few human beings are permitted. It is not so different for human beings. Here, the word smell does not imply an odor. There is no value judgment attached to the word. It simply means that if you exude a particular kind of vasana, existence will ensure you land up in certain places at certain times. If you exude another type of vasana, existence will make sure you land up in certain other places. So, what moves towards you and also what moves away from you are determined by the smell that emanates from you. Your vasana depends, of course, entirely on the kind of residual and memory of karmic content you carry. This works in subtle ways. You may not be aware of it, but in wakefulness and sleep, you are performing karma. A simple thought pattern could make you function in specific ways. If you keep thinking about the movies or perhaps a particular movie star, for instance, you are very likely to see a particular person in a crowd who shares your passion. You might miss the others, those who love books or meditation or something else. If you see 1,000 faces before you, your vasana is likely to draw you towards someone who is similarly inclined. It happened. At a certain point as a teenager, I got myself a huge cobra, a marvelous 12-foot long specimen. It had made its way into a local tube light factory and I caught it. Much to the relief of the factory workers. I had it under my bed in a large glass container. Somehow, one day, it managed to escape. When my father heard a loud hiss from my room, he bent down on his knees to find out what the matter was. When he saw the cobra, he absolutely freaked out. He ran out of the room crying, "Cobra, cobra, cobra, cobra." When I entered the scene, everyone at home was literally standing on chairs and sofas. On the other hand, I ran into the room to protect my snake, anxious that my companion would be thrown out. My parents' vasana produced aversion. My vasana produced attraction. Means my parents' vasana produced aversion and my vasana produced attraction. I managed to smuggle the same snake back and housed it later on the rooftop of my home in a large case. On another occasion, it managed to escape again. I happened to be out of the time. As I came riding back on my bicycle, I saw my parents standing outside the house. Consternations written large upon their faces. The school adjacent to the house had just lit up at 4 in the afternoon. A huge crowd had gathered around the snake. Everyone was terrified. As I drew close, I realized what was going on. I knew I could not go home. There would be too much drama. I simply zoomed by, scooped up my cobra by the middle with one hand, and rode away. This story exemplifies vasana at work. What provoked terror for my parents and others produced a very different response in me. I have never felt any aversion to snakes. My sense of kinship My sense of kinship with them is an ancient vasana that I carry. I have always been comfortable around these exotic creatures. Ever since childhood, I have been able to intuitively track their presence in the wild. If I simply followed my sense of smell, I would know under exactly which rock the snake could be found. I developed quite a reputation in my neighborhood as a snake catcher. There are many reasons for my attraction to snakes. The connection between yogis and snakes is an old one. Both exude a vasana that draws them to each other. The snake is incredibly perceptive creature and it instinctively drawn a high levels of energy. This is why Adi Yogi, the first yogi, is always depicted in traditional iconography with a snake around his throat. In all those cultures in which people have delved into ecstasies perceptions, the Sikh plays a pivotal. The traditional veneration of snakes, cows, and crows in India is based on the awareness that these creatures represent an advanced stage of existential development. Since yogis constantly aspire to enhance their perceptions, the snake is a particularly important presence in the yogic tradition. The cobra is revered as the only creature that can perceive the subtle etheric dimension, even in the daytime. Not surprisingly, it plays a significant role in several creations myths as well, even if it is sometimes being disparaged by those who feared its capabilities. Yet another reason for this vasana is the connection between the snake and the kundalini, the coiled energy that lies at the base of the human spine, which yoga consciously harnesses for spiritual development. The Kundalini energy has been described as serpent energy because of the similarity to the snake. It turns of a shared pattern of movement and stillness. In the early days of my karma as a guru, when I wanted to consecrate a powerful energy from called the Dhyan Linga, a unique structure in which all 7 chakras or energy centers are operating at their optimal capacities. I needed to draw every fierce and intense disciples around me to assist with the project. Now that the mission is complete, I have altered my vasana completely because the need for that kind of concentrated energy work is over. I draw other kinds of people to me and probably unrecognizable to the people who knew me then. Because I am a different person. Depending on the nature of the work, I adjust the tone of my vasana. This may be puzzling to some, but this is the way very spiritual master operates. However, the capacity to adjust one's vasana is not an option reserved only for the spiritually adept. It is possible for each individual to choose not to be a victim of their vasana to a great extent. All it takes is a certain awareness. With a little awareness, every human being can begin to transform habit into choice, compulsion into consciousness. It is important to see that whatever seems determined in your life has been determined by your unconsciously. You have written your own software. Depending on the way you have written your software, that is way you think, that is the way you feel, and that is the way you act, and that is what you invite into your life. Depending on the kind of fragrance you emit, you attract life situations. Some people seems to constantly attract pleasant situations. Others seems to constantly attract unpleasant ones. Or perhaps you see this in different phases in your life. In some phases, wonderful things seems to keep happening. In others, adverse circumstances keep recurring. Now, this simply depends on what you have in your karmic reservoir. Today you have rotten fish, so you attract some terrible situations, and tomorrow you have flowers, so you attract better situations. One thing that we are trying to change through yoga, and hopefully this book, is the kind of fragrance you throw out into the world. Many talk freedom, but they secretly fear it. They feel secure in bondage, and other people opted for the bondage because identification with an ideology, a religion, a relationships, or even a gadget enhance their identity in some way. Consider something as simple as your cell phone. If it is used to enhance activity, it can be source of empowerment. But if it is used to enhance identity, it becomes a source of bondage. In this way, people acquire vasana unconsciously, often believing they are choosing freedom when they are actually choosing enjoyment. It happened some years ago when conducting a yoga program in southern India. I stayed in a place called Velayuddam Palyam, and my lodging was opposite a hill. I was told that Jain monks had lived and meditated in these hillscapes more than 1900 years ago. This antiquity piqued my interest because it meant these monks had lived only a few centuries after the great Jain teachers and Guru Mahavira. One afternoon, I climbed up with a few volunteers to a beautiful cave located like a bird's perch in the rocks. The inside was filthy, strewn with wattles and graffiti. In India, every second rock and monument has the initials of tourists and visiting lovers carved upon it. These caves were no different. They were liberally scratched with the usual KPT, loves, SRM type of stuff. So we cleaned up the place. Now there were rough indentations in the rock floor, which clearly served as beds for the monks. I sat on one of these beds. I suddenly found my body weakening and pulse rate powerfully. Intrigued, I decided to spend the night there. It was a night of a revelation. I realized that the subtle body of the monk who had been there centuries ago was still incredibly alive. I could tell, for instance, that he had no left leg. It had been amputated just below the knee. Now, these monks led quite isolated lives and had done nothing of consequence in the outside world. But they had left behind such a profound imprint that I could tell everything about their lives and their spiritual practices. The great rulers of those times are more or less forgotten. The richest folk and the most learned men and women of those times are erased from our memory. But these simple monks are as alive today as they were 1900 years ago. Their stories are available to those who are receptive, and they are capable of inspiring us to this very day. This is the nature of the right kind of energy work. It is imperishable. Every individual energies carry a certain fragrance. The physical body falls back to the earth. However, the residue of each one of our thoughts, actions, and above all, our energies lingers on. This imprint can also last for millennia after our time. The more conscious the energy work, the more enduring it is. It is up to us to decide the nature of our bequest to the planet. This is what the anonymous Jain monks of Velayuddam Palyam did. Aware that every action has a consequence, they choose to live consciously. As a result, they achieved a certain kind of immortality that the rich and powerful in the history of the world have seldom managed to attain. Thank you.